the map that shouldn't exist and proves someone reached Antarctica 300 years early. There's a map sitting in a dusty archive that breaks every rule of history. It's not locked away in a secret government vault or buried in the ruins of a forgotten civilization. It's been in plain sight for centuries. It's real, it's dated, it's authenticated, and yet it shows something no one in its time should have known. The frozen, ice-covered coastline of Antarctica, drawn accurately, centuries before humans supposedly even saw it. The map is called the Peary Race Map, and if what it shows is true, then everything we know about world exploration is wrong. Not a little wrong, but earth-shatteringly, time-bendingly wrong. Let's rewind to 1513. That's when Ottoman admiral and cartographer Peary Race finished compiling his world map. He used around 20 source maps, some Arab, some Portuguese, some going back to the time of Alexander the Great, to sketch out the known world. Most of it looks expected: Europe, Africa, parts of Asia. But then you get to the bottom of the map. That's when things get strange. Because at the southern edge of the Peary Race map, stretching like an ominous echo of the real world, is what appears to be Antarctica, without ice. Let that sink in. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years after Peary Race drew this map. And when we did find it, it was buried under up to 2 miles of ice. But the Peary Race map doesn't show an icy mass. It shows a coastal landmass with bays, inlets, and rivers, features that modern scientists only discovered in the 20th century using sonar and satellite imaging that pierce the ice sheet. In other words, whoever made the original maps Peary Race used had knowledge we didn't regain until NASA was involved. So what's going on here? When the U.S. Air Force got their hands on a copy in the 1960s, their cartographers analyzed it using seismic data. They compared the map's southern continent to the real subglacial topography of Antarctica, specifically Queen Maud Land, a section of Antarctica's coast. And to their shock, it matched. Not the ice-covered shape, but the ice-free outline that lies beneath, as if someone had mapped Antarctica during a period when it wasn't frozen over. But here's the problem. That would have to be over 6,000 years ago, according to geologists. That's long before any known civilization had ships, charts, or even the concept of global geography. So how did that knowledge survive? And who had it? Let's go deeper. The first thing skeptics say is, it's just a coincidence, that Peary Race made a lucky guess or misinterpreted a piece of South America, but that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The Peary Race map aligns with longitudinal and latitudinal lines in ways that weren't even possible in 1513. Latitude could be measured back then, but longitude was unsolvable until the late 1700s with the invention of the marine chronometer. And yet this map lines up with a spherical Earth model using a level of geospatial accuracy nobody should have had. What's more, the original note Peary Race scribbled on the side of the map says something chilling. This map was based on 20 charts and Mappae Mundi, drawn in the time of Alexander, Lord of the Two Horns. Alexander, the Great. Are we seriously talking about maps that trace their origins back to 300 BC? We need to pause here and ask, could an ancient civilization, or even one before known history, have circumnavigated the globe? Is it possible humanity had a forgotten age of exploration long before Columbus, the Vikings, or the Age of Sail? And if they did, what happened to them? That question brings us into dangerous territory, the kind of history they won't teach you at school, because it threatens the very idea of a linear upward march of civilization. If someone mapped Antarctica before it was covered in ice, then we're talking about a lost civilization older than the last ice age, something that could sail oceans, record coastlines, and preserve that knowledge through time. That doesn't just rewrite textbooks, it rewires our entire perception of who we are. Let's take it one level weirder. Some theorists point to Atlantis. Not the mythical crystal-powered fantasy version, but a real seafaring civilization wiped out by cataclysm, like a sudden climate shift or even a pole reversal. Plato described Atlantis as a powerful maritime culture that existed 9,000 years before his time, placing it around 11,600 years ago. That's exactly when geologists say the Earth went through a rapid climate event known as the Younger Dryas, causing sea levels to rise and massive floods across the globe. Is it a coincidence that the last time Antarctica may have been partly ice-free and mappable was during that same period? Let's consider this. The Orontius Phineas map, created in 1531, just 18 years after the Piri Reis map, also shows a southern continent where Antarctica is, but again, without ice, and again, with coastal details that match what we now know to be accurate. Now we've got two separate maps, both predating the discovery of Antarctica by centuries, both matching subglacial features that couldn't have been known until the 20th century. That's not coincidence anymore. That's a pattern, a trace, a whisper from a time before time. The more you look into this, the more chilling it becomes. Because if someone had this knowledge before recorded history, it means they also had the means to lose it. War, flood, disaster, erasure. And worse, it means they may have tried to warn us. Ancient myths from across the world speak of floods, of gods who sailed across oceans, of maps passed down from gods or star people. Maybe those myths weren't primitive superstition. Maybe they were encrypted memories of real knowledge lost to time. So where did Piri Reis get his sources? That's part of the mystery. His own notes mention charts drawn by Portuguese infidels and maps from ancient times. There are claims that some of his source maps were taken from the Library of Alexandria before it was destroyed. If that's true, it would mean the knowledge that survived into Piri Reis's time was already ancient when Jesus walked the earth. But here's the kicker. Some features on the map, like the Andes Mountains and the Amazon River, are drawn with such accuracy that they had to come from aerial or top-down knowledge, something impossible without flight. It's as if the source maps had a bird's-eye view of Earth. How? How do you explain this? Historians shrug it off. They say it's all just mistakes, distortions, guesses. But the deeper you go, the harder it is to believe that a map this accurate, with notes declaring ancient sources, just happened by chance. So maybe it's time we stopped assuming our ancestors were dumber than us. Maybe they were advanced in ways we forgot to preserve. Maybe what we call history is just the last few pages of a much older book, and the rest got burned, buried, or frozen under miles of ice. And if that's true, what else have we forgotten? Maybe what we call history is just the last few pages of a much older book, and the rest got burned, buried, or frozen under miles of ice. And now here's where I step in. Listen, if you're sitting there thinking, why didn't they teach us this? You're not alone. They don't want you to ask these questions. They want you comfortable with what's in the textbook, the safe version, the one with all the messes cleaned up and the mysteries erased. But not here. Not on Uncle Luke Tells. Here we ask the questions that keep historians awake at night. We dig up the secrets buried beneath ice, beneath ash, and beneath centuries of lies. And if you're still with me, it means you're not afraid to stare into the unknown, and that makes you one of us. So if you want more stories like this, the ones they buried on purpose, do one thing right now. Comment below with your favorite conspiracy history, smash that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we're just warming up. Section 2 is where it really gets uncomfortable. Uncle Luke's got you. Let's keep digging. If the Piri Reis map was a one-time fluke, we could chalk it up to coincidence. But it's not. It's just the first thread in a much larger, tangled web. And the deeper you pull, the more impossible it becomes to ignore what it reveals. Because there's another detail that gets missed by casual eyes. The Piri Reis map doesn't just depict Antarctica. It depicts it in the correct longitudinal alignment. But here's the thing. Measuring longitude with accuracy wasn't just difficult in 1513, it was impossible. Not difficult, not unlikely. It simply could not be done with the tools of that time. Calculating latitude? Sure. That's just about measuring the height of the sun or stars above the horizon. But longitude? That requires precise timekeeping across distances, something that wasn't invented until the 18th century with the marine chronometer. And yet, here's this 500-year-old map that places a continent we supposedly hadn't discovered in exactly the right location, drawn in detail we wouldn't rediscover until sonar scanning in the 20th century. Which means one thing. Piri Reis didn't guess. He copied, from a map, or maps, made by someone who had technology far beyond anything we credit to the past. Someone who knew not just where land masses were, but how to place them with geometric, even astronomical precision. But let's go even further back, beyond Piri Reis himself, because his notes claim that his sources came from earlier maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, others whose origins are unknown. The implication is terrifying. These were copies of copies, fragments of a knowledge system older than history itself. And it wasn't just Piri Reis who stumbled onto them. A map from 1531, the Orontius Phineus map, also shows an ice-free Antarctica. Same coastal outlines, same uncanny accuracy. And then there's the Boache map from 1737, which not only shows Antarctica, but splits it into two land masses, just as modern seismic studies reveal it actually is, two major geological plates hidden beneath the thick glacial crust. The Boache map even labels river systems flowing through it, something only confirmed with satellite scans centuries later. Who the hell was drawing this stuff? How could anyone in the 16th or 17th century know the substructure of a continent buried under 2 miles of solid ice? It shouldn't be possible, unless the original maps came from a time when that ice wasn't there. Now here's where it gets weird. The last time parts of Antarctica may have been exposed, not fully ice-free but partially navigable, was around 11,600 years ago. That's the end of the last ice age. It's also the same date Plato gave for the destruction of Atlantis. Too convenient? Maybe. Or maybe it's a clue. Because at that exact point in time, Earth experienced the Younger Dryas, a sudden climate catastrophe marked by flooding, rapid melting, and the destruction of entire ecosystems. Some researchers, like those behind the controversial Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggest a comet or cosmic impact triggered this event. If that's true, it could have erased coastal civilizations overnight, literally swallowed by rising seas. And if one of those civilizations had mapped the world before it sank, their charts, or fragments of them, might be all that's left, passed down, hidden, recopied, misinterpreted, until someone like Piri Reis stumbled on a remnant, a ghost of a forgotten age, drawn in ink on parchment. Mainstream historians scoff at this. They say it's impossible, a fantasy built on distortions. But the maps are real, the features are accurate, and the implications are dangerous. Because if an advanced seafaring civilization existed during the last ice age, it would mean our entire understanding of human progress is upside down, that we are not the apex of discovery, but the survivors of a collapse. That high technology, exploration, and global navigation didn't begin with Europe. They began with people we don't remember, and that's the part that shakes the system. Because if we acknowledge that possibility, we also have to ask, what else did they know? Let's take one more unsettling turn. The Piri Reis map not only shows detailed coastlines, it also seems to use a projection style known as equidistant azimuthal. That's a mathematical method of projecting the globe onto a flat surface, keeping distances and directions consistent from a central point. But that method wasn't formally invented until modern cartography. Yet here it is, embedded into a map from 1513, created by a naval admiral who swore his sources were ancient. That type of projection requires advanced mathematics, trigonometry, spherical geometry, and a fundamental understanding of Earth's shape and size. In short, it requires science we associate with satellites and geospatial engineering. And somehow, this knowledge existed before the age of sail. Now remember this. Peary Race himself didn't invent any of it. He was a compiler, a transmitter. He openly stated that his map was a fusion of older sources, and those sources, they're lost, destroyed, or locked away. Some say the Library of Alexandria held these secrets before it was burned. Others believe ancient scrolls were stolen by early empires and hidden, and a few whisper that these maps and the civilizations behind them are deliberately erased, because they don't fit the narrative, because they prove that history is not a straight line, but a broken circle, that humanity may have risen before and fallen. And if that's true, if there was once a global civilization with ships, math, mapping systems, and astronomical knowledge far beyond its time, then what else did they see? What else did they leave behind? The sudden disappearance of cultures across the globe, from the Olmec to the Indus Valley, starts to look less like isolated collapse and more like synchronized erasure. Flood myths exist on every continent. Sumerian tablets, Mayan codices, Aboriginal songs, even the Bible all speak of a great deluge. Is it possible they're all remembering the same event, from different shores? Because here's the final twist of this section. In 1959, the same year Antarctica was declared a scientific preserve under international treaty, a group of American and Soviet scientists reviewed old cartographic evidence and stumbled onto a line of longitude drawn with disturbing precision, one that matches exactly with the modern geodetic pole location. That's not just strange. It's impossible unless whoever drew the map understood Earth's axial tilt, which would mean precession, astronomy, calculations over thousands of years, and all of it from someone we're told shouldn't have existed. So either the Peary Race map and its siblings are evidence of the biggest historical coincidence ever, or they are whispers of a past so old, so dangerous, and so advanced that we buried it under ice and forgot it ever happened, on purpose. And the craziest part? We might not be the first to find it. If ancient maps like Peary Race and Buache whisper about lost civilizations, then what comes next is the part no one wants to talk about, the part modern governments still treat like a ghost story with a lock on it. Because here's the deal. Sometime in the early 20th century, the world's most powerful nations started acting really strange when it came to Antarctica. And not because of the cold, not because of the ice, but because of what might be beneath it, buried, hidden, frozen in time, or maybe preserved. That's where the story goes from curious to downright sinister. And it starts with one of the darkest chapters in modern history, the Nazis. In the late 1930s, as Hitler's ambitions reached global scale, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Antarctica, not for weather data, not for penguin biology, but to claim land. They called it Neuschwabenland. And it wasn't just a flag-planting mission. It was accompanied by ships, aircraft, aerial photography, and some of the most advanced surveying equipment of the time. They dropped swastika-marked darts across hundreds of miles of frozen wasteland. Why? What were they looking for? The official line is that it was about whaling routes and territorial claims. But in private letters and intelligence reports that surfaced after the war, there were whispers of something else: ancient technology, buried structures, a warm water lake hidden beneath the ice that the Nazis believed was access to a forgotten power. Sound like science fiction? Maybe. But consider this. The Third Reich had entire divisions dedicated to archaeology, ancient languages, and esoteric knowledge. They believed history had been altered, and they were looking to recover what had been lost. And if they thought the Peary Race map was more than just an artifact, then they might have believed it pointed to a gateway, a real one. Now jump forward a few years. World War II ends, Germany falls, but suddenly, every major Allied power turns their attention to Antarctica. In 1946, the U.S. launched Operation High Jump, a massive military expedition led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. It involved 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and over 4,000 personnel, all for a supposed training mission on ice in peacetime, in a location with no known threat. Why? Admiral Byrd himself gave conflicting answers. In one interview with a Chilean newspaper, he claimed the U.S. was preparing to defend the Western Hemisphere from potential threats coming from the poles. A bizarre thing to say unless you know something the public doesn't. Then, just as quickly as it began, Operation High Jump ended. Abruptly, weeks ahead of schedule. The official story? Weather, equipment failures, budget. But unofficially, there were reports. Strange ones. Aircraft encountering unknown flying objects, radio silence, radar interference, mysterious lights beneath the ice. It sounded like madness. So wild, most historians write it off as Cold War paranoia. But if you take a step back, it starts to look like everyone was chasing the same ghost. A pre-Ice Age world, a lost technology, a map that wasn't supposed to exist, and maybe directions to something else. Because here's where everything starts connecting. Around that same time, scientists began discovering deep lakes under the Antarctic ice, like Lake Vostok, sealed off for over 15 million years. No sunlight, no contamination, just a self-contained biosphere of unknown organisms completely isolated. But here's the catch. No one's allowed to drill deep into it. Not fully, not freely. Despite decades of interest, every exploration has been wrapped in red tape, secrecy, and international oversight. Ask too many questions about Antarctica, and you hit a wall, not just from one country, from all of them. Because in 1959, something very strange happened. The Antarctic Treaty. A sweeping international agreement signed by 12 nations at the height of the Cold War, including the U.S. and Soviet Union, to make Antarctica off-limits for military use, resource extraction, and permanent settlement. Think about that. These countries couldn't agree on anything else. They were building nukes and pointing missiles at each other, but they agreed instantly that no one could own, drill, or exploit Antarctica. Not then. Not ever. Why? Why would the most power-hungry empires in history willingly give up control of an entire continent, unless they knew what was down there, and agreed to keep it quiet? And it wasn't just nations acting weird. Scientists, too. In the decades since the treaty, hundreds of researchers have gone to Antarctica. But the flow of data is tight, selective, and often sanitized. Glaciologists publish surface data. Biologists talk about microbes and moss. But when seismic anomalies show up, when underground heat sources are found in supposedly dead zones, the stories vanish. The press stops asking questions. Every so often, a blurry satellite image pops up showing a geometric pattern on the ice, a dark circle in a white wasteland, a possible cave system stretching for miles, and then it's gone. But here's the real question. What if the map wasn't just showing Antarctica? What if it was leading to something inside it? Let's rewind one last time. Piri Reis claimed to have used maps from the Library of Alexandria, the library that was destroyed, violently, deliberately, in one of history's great cultural arsons, a place that held ancient charts, astronomical data, and histories we'll never read. What if the reason the Piri Reis map survived was because it slipped through the cracks? What if it's one of the only surviving pieces of a global knowledge system that was buried, either by disaster or design? That's why the map matters, not because it's old, not because it's pretty, but because it shows us the world before the story started, before the collapse, before the reset. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start questioning every explorer's journal, every colonial map, every first discovery you were taught in school. Because maybe the New World wasn't new. Maybe the world was already mapped, and the explorers were just treasure hunters with a stolen guidebook. And if that's true, then we're not just talking about a lost civilization. We're talking about a deliberate cover-up of humanity's true past, a past where people crossed oceans long before Columbus, a past where maps showed continents buried under ice, because someone had seen them before the ice came, and maybe, just maybe, some part of that civilization didn't disappear. Maybe they adapted. Maybe they went underground. Maybe what's buried beneath Antarctica isn't just evidence, it's the survivors. And the silence from the top, the treaties, the restricted zones, the censored data, that's not science. That's fear. Because once the truth gets out, you can't control it, you can't own it, and you sure as hell can't teach it in school. But you know what you can do? You can talk about it. You can spread it. You can refuse to forget. And if you've made it this far, then you're the kind of person who knows the real stories are the ones they bury deepest. So here's what you do next. Go ahead and hit that like button if your brain's been spinning for the past 15 minutes. Comment below what you think they're hiding under the ice. And subscribe. Because Uncle Luke, I'm just getting started. There are more maps, more lies, and more secrets carved in stone, hidden in stars, and whispered in ancient languages that we were never supposed to understand. But we will, because truth melts ice, and Uncle Luke always finds the flame.